The content of this episode may not be suitable for some audiences. Listener's discretion is advised. Welcome to the Place of Rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Virginia and I discuss the Matrix of R.E.S.T and how its key elements are self-evident in our lives. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Virginia, as 2025 comes to a close, we wanted to focus a little bit more on the framework of R.E.S.T to try to lay a foundation before the new year. So we wanted to look again at, specifically this week, the Matrix of R.E.S.T. We live in a culture right now that is obsessed with my truth, right? And that can show up in many different ways depending on the person. Maybe we say, well, that was my experience, or this is the way that I see it. But you have pinpointed that this is actually one of the most destructive thoughts responsible for a ton of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in our lives and in the nation as a whole and globally as well. How does the R.E.S.T matrix cut through all of that noise and bring to the forefront the path to wholeness?
I don't know if I'm going to entirely answer your question. I got hung up on your first statement about the Matrix of R.E.S.T. So let me see if I can start there for the benefit of our listening audience. Thank you, by the way, for this question. I don't want to drown everybody, but I think in the most fundamental and elementary framework, we have to remember who we're talking about, what we're talking about, and most importantly, why we're talking about this. Confusion, chaos, and dis-ease reigns in our day and age, and it's been compounding, as we've talked about before, for many, many, many decades. But truth be told, it's taken us a little bit to figure out what hit us. Much like often happens in our own personal life, it's happening to us as a generation. So what are we talking about? Confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. Why? Why? Because it's afflicting us to the point that we are medicating at unprecedented rates. Our children are taking their life at unprecedented rates, intentionally and unintentionally, through the use of a number of different substances to medicate their pain. And who is us? Who are we? A spirit, a soul, and a body. So I like to begin with a very simple framework. What's upon us? What's happening to us? And then who is us? Who are we? You know what I mean? So kind of start backwards there for a minute. But usually problems take our breath away and we can't take our eyes off the problem. So we can see the power of the propaganda and competing ideas that are benefiting. I think both sides benefit. One side usually benefits by propaganda. Propaganda is a perversion of the truth. So you got to ask who's taking the truth and perverting it, right? Whether it's in the medical field, whether it's economics, whether it's in politics, whether it's in a bad marriage or in a afflicted marriage, whether it's in a company. It doesn't matter if it's a company or if it's any body, anything that has a spirit, a soul, and a body and takes on a life of itself. This is of interest to us at R.E.S.T. But for all practical purposes, let's address specifically the people that run those organizations, those bodies, which is human beings, not human doings, human beings. And human beings have a spirit, a soul, and a body. Human beings are made to be fruitful and multiply. What? Ideas. Well, first of all, themselves. It's not good for us to be alone. We saw what COVID did when we are alone. We're social creatures created to live in community. So it is not fruitful for any man to be alone. So we are told in these ancient documents that a woman was made to fulfill, to complete a man, for example. And then they do what? They build a family. And that's supposed to propagate and advance what? Fruitfulness and creativity. And then we're told that a man by nature is made for that purpose and for that process to bring them joy in the spirit, the soul, the body. And they're supposed to subdue. Hey, whatever you do, make sure it's under your capacity to govern those things. And then it's what? Have dominion over those things. Not only govern, but direct, control, regulate, restrain yourself and everything so that those things can do what? So everything you set your hands to can be fruitful, can multiply, can do, so you can be content, so you can experience the joy of the creative process. Again, spiritually, psychologically, and physically, in the context of a family, for example. So the capacity for us to do this in balance, harmony, and coherence, it determines our capacity to experience peace. Balance, harmony, and coherence puts an organism, a body, whether it's a family or an organism, into a place of peace, into a place of rest. And so it can do what? Thrive. A family that is able to live in balance, harmony, and coherence, there's peace when you step into that home and you feel it, right? That family has the capacity to have a lot of productive things happening in that home, and everybody feels it. We want to be with those people. And they have the capacity to advance and do and create and manage a lot of beautiful things. That's a life-giving force. That is the gift. The gift is that there's spheres of influence and structures of authority in our life. Again, spirit, soul, or physical things, company, families, organizations, churches, schools, whatever you want to call it. That is the gift. It's made up of human beings with a spirit, a soul, and a body, and they have the capacity to govern those organizations, to be fruitful and multiply, to subdue things and bring it under their best intentions that'll sustain life. And then to have dominion to govern those things. That's the gift. But then we all know we encounter a problem. And the problem in our matrix are these things, not the things that compel us, that are driven by the highest intentions of the soul of the man, but those things that either in an organization or relationship drive. The things that compel us come from our soul, but the things that drive us come from our central nervous system, our flesh. Those things are always going to be at war with each other because the flesh always says, I want, I need, I deserve. Again, a person, an organization, anything that has a constitution, any sphere of government, when it's driven by the I want, I need, and I deserve, the focus is not going to be the life-giving ideas that advance the life of the organization. They're going to become what? Self-centered. We call that narcissism in today's day and age. And I laugh every time I see another clip on narcissism because they're explaining the human condition, but they're analyzing it as if it's something foreign to them. Oh, no. Narcissism is common to the heart of man. And at the end of the day, when you peel back the layers of who we are, should we not self-govern, we're narcissistic by nature.
One clarifying question, because you're talking about the difference between the soul that compels us and the flesh that drives us. We at R.E.S.T bring in the anatomy and physiology and often talk about listening to the narratives that your body is telling you to help step into greater measures of freedom for healing. Can you help us understand the difference there?
Yes, thank you. Often somebody's telling us a story, and we're sitting at the edge of our seat listening to the story. And that person is sharing a story with a great deal of heart and conviction. But the heart and conviction that that person is sharing the story with doesn't set well with us because we're getting mixed messages. So we know the person isn't lying to us, but something's missing and we can't quite put our finger on it. It's because all of our good intentions can be expressed by our mouth, but our body is revealing our motives or a memory or a trauma. So the person listening is getting two competing messages. The narrative that the person is sharing with all their best intentions, but they're getting another story too. And that is a conflicting message that's coming from their central nervous system. And I think we've all experienced this sense, something's not adding up. Not because we're necessarily accusing the person of lying to us, but we're getting two competing messages. The two competing messages would be consistent with your question. That person is speaking about something with great conviction, and they're sharing it from the bottom of their heart, but their body's not coming along with them. And so the listener then has to pause and say, excuse me, let me ask a few questions to determine the disparity between what the person's saying and what their body is carrying. For example, we hear a lot of violent political rhetoric right now on both sides. One side is violent and the other one seems to be a little condescending and incredulous about the stupidity of the violent. The people that are spewing violent speech are saying that they're preserving freedom, democracy. And the people that are condescending are saying they're crazy, that that's an escape from reason. The people that are spewing hate are overwhelmed by a spirit of fear. And the people that are generally, it might be too broad of an application, but the people that are stand in judgment saying they don't have a point to make. There isn't a point to make. And there's so much ignorance there that there's not even a point of contact. If we keep talking and yelling at each other, one's yelling with righteous indignation from their heart at the stupidity and the foolishness of the people that are angry, burning down their own cities. And the people angry and burning down their own cities are just overwhelmed by fear and bitterness because they're buried alive. If those people on both sides don't stop and ask questions, what about the I in this equation is making it impossible for us to have a communication? We're going to resort to violence. One of them is going to be physical violence, exhibit A, Charlie, God bless his soul and rest forever. And one's going to start killing, and the other one is going to start losing sight of what's sacred about our common humanity and take the intellectual high road and talk down to them. Because the level of ignorance is so evident and it's so exposed. But both sides will be committing a crime against themselves and each other. So this kind of thing is not fruitful. We need to stop and hear with our ears and listen with our heart and ask questions, because the I want and I need and I deserve is occupying space in both of those sides of the conversation, if you will. But the one that insults the loudest isn't necessarily morally superior than the one who hits the hardest and assaults the loudest. You know what I mean? Burning down cities and stuff like that. It's just not productive. They both create a culture of death. So I think we need to step back and realize that the anatomy of our descent, things really begin to fall apart when we camp on the I want, I need, and I deserve this. And I think that's the anatomy of our descent, really. Those are the ideas that fuel the lies that become central to our descent, which is the next part of our matrix.
Could you briefly go over what the anatomy of descent is?
Yeah, the anatomy of descent is when the religious, pious worldview that are quickly becoming intellectually really superior in the debate forget that we are all as a nation in a state of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. If we do not begin to become curious and ask questions and engage the far left, they keep saying, the Marxists, in dialogue, violent as it may feel, uncomfortable as it may feel, then we're no better than the destruction that we accuse them of creating. If the people that think I'm a fascist and people like us are fascists, or the intellectual elites are fascists and they're destroying democracy, if they don't stop and examine, what am I really angry about? Where does this root of bitterness come? Is somebody financing me to go display anger? And why would they do that? Why would they leverage this kind of destruction in our inner cities to our communities, and impoverished communities, I might add? Because that's the easiest access point to bring about more confusion, chaos, and disease, illness, and death and destruction. If they don't stop and ask themselves, what am I really angry about? What am I really afraid of? And if they don't become honest with themselves and trace the root of that to the conflict within themselves, there's not going to be many of us left standing. Both sides have to realize that a lot of lies are informing them. But if each side, both the conservative zealots, religious zealots, if you will, and the Marxists, if you will, the leftist extremists, if they don't stop and get in touch with their own humanity and ask themselves, what's causing this kind of confusion, chaos, and disease within me? Why can't I be tolerant to ask the opposing side a question and understand what's fueling both of their posture? If they don't do that, a bunch of lies informed by I want, I need, and I deserve by their own depravity will put them into a deep state of confusion, chaos, dis-ease, and honestly, loathing. But as they attack the other side, they're going to do what? Violate their own conscience. Because when we attack and destroy each other, we're desecrating something sacred about ourselves. That's what sin is. Sin is a violent assault, a violent attack against our very own conscience. For example, when we lie because we think it doesn't hurt anybody else, it is advancing a crime against our very constitution, because our body will not cooperate with a lie. And I reference a story. Somebody's telling you a big story and they believe it. But their body's telling me another story. That means they've managed to dissociate from the truth of something, intentionally or not sometimes, by the way. But their body's not cooperating with the narrative that they're sharing and they're communicating. When somebody smiles, oh, I'm so happy to see you. And what are you thinking? No, you're not. Because their words are saying one thing, but their body's telling you another. I'm so happy you were able to come to Thanksgiving. No, actually, you're not. You were hoping I couldn't come. Do you understand? We pick up that conflict in spite of what a person's saying. So what do? We sin, we lie. We commit an offense against ourselves. But the person speaking to us can tell we're lying. Consciously or subconsciously, they can tell we're lying. So when these lies inform us, again, just by way of review, we go into a state of confusion. We violate our own conscience. Silly little example I just explained. And then what do? We cover by pounding on the compliments or pounding on the insult. We cover our own insecurities. We hide by excusing the things we're covering. And then what do? We blame quietly. Geez, she's so self-absorbed. She can't tell. I can tell. She doesn't want me here. Or whatever the conversation is. You can apply these principles to anything because that is the anatomy of dissent. So the gift, by way of review, is that we have these spheres of influence, these structures of authority, and they're all contained within our very anatomy. And we have the capacity to advance life and be creative and do beautiful and wonderful things and have dominion and subdue and all those wonderful things to advance the cause of life. And there's also this thing at play. And there's this problem that seems to always be trying to get in and subvert our best intentions and divert, I should say, our best intentions. And it comes in the form of this, I want, I need, and I deserve. And that's usually driven by a central nervous system that wants to be satisfied immediately instead of the soul that can be a little patient for what it knows. It can reason and it can be empathetic and sympathetic. Central nervous system wants what it wants. So those three things can really send us into a tailspin because we're going to believe a bunch of lies about whatever situation we're dealing with. And those lies send us again into confusion. That confusion usually causes us to violate our conscience. And what do? We cover, we hide, and we blame. And that is the anatomy of dissent. And the reason that matrix is really important, because if you can understand what the gift is, If you can understand what the problem is, and if you can understand how something falls apart, guess what? Wow, I can live rest. I don't have to be taken captive by the lies, the intrusive lies. Sometimes they're generational lies, by the way, that haunt us for a lifetime. But if we are willing to try to identify those things, we don't have to be taken captive by those things.
And to your point, sometimes these things, these reactivities are so hardwired into our brain that it just happens automatically. So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit what you were sharing to me before we started recording about Dallas Willard's work and R.E.S.T's work, and compared to modern neuroscience, and how these work with our actual brain's anatomy.
Yeah. Well, Dallas Willard has written many great books. He's a professor of theology at the University of Southern California. Great thinker. Also wrote the book Divine Conspiracy. And it really talks about the tapestry of everything that we cover in R.E.S.T. But he gives a philosophical framework from which you can reason. I'd recommend those two books. But Renovation of the Heart specifically, I was captivated by the fact that what he's talking about is consistent with the tapestry of the brain, the executive function, the temporals. So I would invite everyone, Renovation of the Heart, find his lectures, reason through this, and then say, that's kind of interesting. Here's one of those parallel analogies where the anatomy of the soul correlates with the tapestry of the brain. Because I always say, whatever out of the abundance of the heart, we're told in these ancient documents in the scriptures, the mouth speaks. So guard your heart above all else, because everything about your life really comes from that central, that primary sphere of government, if you will, right, which is your heart. And it sends impulses to your brain that send electrical currents, frequencies, energy, vibration throughout everything that informs the whole rest of your body. So you always want to begin with the heart of the matter, and not the heart of your neighbor, the heart of the guys on TV, the heart of the leftists, or the heart of the ignorant religious zealots. No. Start with your heart. Examine your heart. What is it tell you? What are the whispers? What are the lies that it's telling you about you? And you're going to find consistency between that and the executive function of your brain, your temporals, your occipitals. It's a little bit too heavy of a topic to introduce, given everything I just threw at everybody. But I do, so I'll save it for next time. But I think as a caveat, I would encourage everyone listening to find a friend, share the podcast, encourage them to take a listen of the Matrix of R.E.S.T, our reconstitution approach to healing. It is a data-driven, evidence-based program. I'm talking about a lot of things I have statistics and data on. So I didn't just roll out of bed and come up with this. But then I want you to go listen to Dallas Willard, The Renovation of the Heart. It's pretty fantastic. It's thick. He's really scholarly, but this is fascinating. We're living in really confusing and chaotic times, and we're all going to have to dig deep to understand the anatomy of our own soul and what it's going to take to renovate our own hearts. And that's at the heart of R.E.S.T. It's a matter of fact, our parent company is Tender Hearts Enterprises. Why? Because everything's about the heart. But R.E.S.T is just one facet of the heart. As a culture, however, we're stupefied. We're dumbfounded by what's happening. We're in a stupor. And if we don't dig deep into these themes and begin to think provocatively about our own behavior and how we govern our own lives, we're going to see a lot of things die that don't need to go, but they can't be restored.
Now that we have the elements of the anatomy of dissent, one question that I wanted to bring back from the beginning, you were talking about how we're seeing a lot in our generation and our children, they are medicating their pain. Where in the anatomy of dissent does that fall?
A breach in the spheres of influence and structures of authority. Always. Confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in the home. The authority of a father is not understood and managed responsibly, and the power of a mother is often not understood and also mismanaged. Men need respect, but sadly, there's been a breach they've made so many compromises, moral compromises, and we've justified and rationalized them for the last 20, 30, 40 years in the name of freedom. And then women, too, have made a lot of compromises, and they left the value and the merit and everything that's sacred about the home in pursuit of things that they thought would give them more freedom, and it hasn't. It's enslaved them. And so the authority in the home and the power of the home is breached. So the children growing up in a home, I always draw that little snowman. It's kind of like the head is the dad, the heart and the body is the mom, right? It's not because she's less. What's a head without a body and a body without a head? Nothing. There's no life. There's an amputated being, and that's, I think, what we have in America. I think that little structure is inverted. And that's why we're so wobbly and unstable in all our ways. But the fruit of that instability is children that are lost. They don't have an identity. They don't have a purpose. They've lost their identity. They've lost their purpose. They don't have a sense of self in the context of the family system. And so that's what's creating a lot of the confusion, chaos, and disease. And if I could add that it's not just the kids medicating, the parents started it. They believed the lies. They wanted peace. I need tranquility. I need my son to do well in school. And he deserves everything he can, and ADHD and everything that comes with it. I think we bought the research and Big Pharma's lies on that matter. And we medicated a generation of children. I can't tell you how many families I've worked with that their addiction began because their parents medicated. And all they wanted to do, I can't tell you how many kids have flushed their Adderall down the toilet and never told their parents they weren't taking it because it made them so sick. And then how much trouble they got in after they found out. Somebody just brought it to my attention recently. They got in a lot of trouble for not taking the medicine that the doctors, specialists, the authorities, the law said the physicians, the most trusted people in America, were doctors. I think that's slowly changing. So I'm really excited to see that some of the most trusted people in America today are moms and dads that are saying, oh, I don't think so. Wait a minute, no more. So we need to be the most trusted people in our own spheres of influence. That means we need to self-govern. Dads, take responsibility and use your authority wisely. Everybody desperately needs to respect you. Moms, you have a lot of power. Think about how you use it and be willing to manage it well. If you don't have a husband that's worth following, you can still win him over by having the strength and the courage to learn how to love sacrificially. And that means you do the right things, the right ways, for the right reasons, and get out of God's way. God will deal with your husband. And when that is not possible, then you do the hard thing and you take care of your family. And husbands, instead of complaining about your wives and looking where the grass is greener, not only does the grass need mowing, but the greener grass, as you see on the other side, is hiding all the pits and all the rocks and the rough terrain on the other side. And by the time you figure it out, it's too late. You've lost your family, you've lost your soul. But what's worse is you're going to lose your children. So I think we've had enough of that. I think we've all learned from that. And I think it's time for us to become intentional about rest and recovering individually and corporately without judgment against each other, and to begin to heal the hemorrhaging heart of a generation. Let's take responsibility. If your kids are gone, then this kind of work becomes more important than ever, because they need to see you heal. They need to see you bend the knee and be humble. Take your blows. Stop and think about, take inventory of why your kids are in the state that they're in. And instead of trying to get them help, get you help. And the help you need is rest. Reconcile the conflict within yourself. You'll be shocked what happens with them. If your kids are 3, or if they're 30, or if they're 50, it doesn't matter. It's never too late. While we're in time, we can live rest. This is the age of rest.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about rest, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of Rest. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of rest, please go to theplaceofrest.com /donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.